My name is Claire Dunhill. I am 34 years old, and I'm holding a brass skeleton key right now, 3 inches long, tarnished green along the teeth, still warm from sitting in my pocket against my hip for the last 9 hours, because this key opened the front door of a ranch house that no longer belongs to my family. It belonged to my grandmother, she left it to me, and my father sold it out from under me to bankroll my brother's restaurant before the probate ink was dry. The key weighs almost nothing, less than an ounce. But when I turned it over in my hand the morning I found out what had happened, I noticed something about the bow, the flat top where your thumb presses. Someone had filed down the original scrollwork, ground it smooth. Recently. The brass underneath was brighter than the rest, almost gold against the dark patina. My fingers traced the flat spot where the design used to be, and something inside me locked into place. I didn't move. I didn't call anyone. I held the key between my thumb and forefinger and turned it under the kitchen light, and my mind was already doing what 14 years of municipal land records work had trained it to do. I was reading the damage. I was dating it. I was tracing it back to whoever thought they could make something old look like something it wasn't. My father said, "We moved some things around with the property. Tyler needed the capital, and we couldn't let the opportunity close." He said it the way you'd explain switching cable providers, like it was administrative, like he'd consulted a spreadsheet and made the reasonable call. I said nothing. I held the key tighter, and I was already pulling the first thread. Before I tell you what this key led me to when I started pulling, where are you right now? Drop it in the comments. I want to know where this reaches, because the story of what happened to Ridgeline Ranch has been traveling through my family like a rumor for 18 months. I want it told once. I want it told right, and I want to know who's listening. My grandmother was Elaine Macon Dunhill, and she raised cattle on 412 acres outside Hardin, Montana. She wasn't sentimental about most things, she was sentimental about land. She told me once, sitting on the porch of that ranch house in a metal chair that had been there since Carter was president, she told me that people who don't own dirt will always be at the mercy of people who do. I was 11, I didn't fully understand. But I remembered it the way you remember the first time someone tells you something true that isn't meant to comfort you. I started visiting Ridgeline every summer when I was 9. My brother Tyler, 3 years older, stopped coming when he was 13. He said it smelled like manure and boredom. My grandmother noted this without comment. She noted everything without comment. She just watched, and she remembered, and when she finally acted, the action was precise. I became a municipal land records examiner for Yellowstone County. That's my profession. I spend my days reading deeds, easements, mineral rights transfers, plat maps, survey amendments. I read who owned what, when, under what conditions, and whether the paperwork matches the ground truth. I verify that what is written down is what actually happened to a piece of earth. I catch discrepancies between recorded instruments and actual property status. I catch date errors, forged notarizations, boundary descriptions that contradict physical surveys. That skill had caught fraudulent transfers and prevented illegal subdivisions across 3 counties for over a decade. It was about to dismantle my own father's biggest lie. When my grandmother died in March 2 years ago, her will was clear. I sat in the attorney's office in Billings and heard it read. The ranch, all 412 acres, the house, the outbuildings, the leased grazing rights, went to me. Her savings, approximately $91,000, were split between me and Tyler. Her truck went to her neighbor Dale, who had maintained it for free for 11 years. The will was dated, witnessed, notarized by a notary I later confirmed had a clean commission. Airtight. My father, Richard Dunhill, was not mentioned in the will. He had not spoken to his mother in 4 years at the time of her death. There had been an argument about money, specifically about a loan he had taken from her in 2016 that he never repaid. $14,000. She had documentation. She had also, apparently, had enough. Tyler's restaurant concept, a wood-fired pizza operation in Bozeman called Hearthstone, had been in the planning stages for about a year when Grandma Elaine died. Tyler needed startup capital. He'd been turned down by 2 lenders. He needed roughly $340,000 to secure the lease, renovate the space, and purchase equipment. He didn't have it. My father didn't have it. But the ranch was worth, conservatively, $680,000. The grazing lease alone generated $19,000 a year. The irony is that I spent every working day making sure property records told the truth, that someone's land couldn't be taken by paperwork sleight of hand. And I didn't think to check whether my own inheritance was being handled by the one person most motivated to make it disappear. I should have checked sooner. I chose to grieve instead. I chose to trust the system I worked inside. And by the time I held this key and noticed the filed down scroll work, the ranch had already been sold. Here's what I knew on the surface. My father told me there were delays in probate. He told me the title transfer was complicated by an easement dispute with the neighboring property. He told me these things over the phone in the same calm, administrative voice he used for everything. I believed him for 5 months. I believed him because he was my father, and because the lies he told were exactly the kind of procedural delays that actually do happen in Montana real estate. They were plausible, they were boring, and boring lies are the ones that work. Then I found the key. I found it in a box of my grandmother's personal effects that my father had shipped to me, 5 months after her death, 2 months late, and only after I asked 3 times. The box contained her reading glasses, a Bible with a cracked spine, 2 photo albums, a small cedar jewelry box with nothing inside, and this key, her house key, the one she'd carried every day. And when I turned it over, I noticed the filed down bow, the scroll work that had been ground smooth. A normal person would wonder why someone altered an old key. A land records examiner asks a different question. Who altered it, and what were they trying to make it match? See, the original key to the Ridgeline Ranch house was a Corbin cabinet lock skeleton key, manufactured sometime in the 1940s, distinctive scrollwork on the bow that matched the original lock set. That scrollwork was essentially a maker's mark. You couldn't duplicate it at a hardware store. And if you were selling a property and needed to hand over a key to the new buyer, the key had to match the lock, unless you changed the lock first, in which case, you would not need the original key at all. In which case, you would not file down the bow of the old key. Unless you wanted the old key to look like a different key. Unless you wanted someone, specifically, me, to believe this was still the same key to the same lock on the same door of the same house that still belonged to me. Then I found something else. I drove to the county clerk's office on a Tuesday morning. I walked in the way I always walked in, with my badge, my employee access, and 14 years of knowing exactly which index books to pull. I requested the deed records for Ridgeline Ranch, Legal Description Section 14, Township 1 South, Range 27 East. What I found made me sit down in a chair that wasn't mine at a desk that wasn't mine and stare at a document for a very long time. Something inside me was running calculations I hadn't asked it to begin. The ranch had been sold. Warranty deed, recorded 7 weeks earlier. Grantor, the estate of Elaine Macon Dunhill, represented by Richard Allen Dunhill. Personal representative, grantee, Flat Rock Holdings LLC. Sale price, $410,000, $270,000 under market value. I pulled the estate file. My father had petitioned the court to be appointed personal representative of my grandmother's estate. The petition stated, under oath, that he was the sole surviving heir with a beneficial interest in the estate's real property assets. That was a lie. I was named in the will. I was the sole beneficiary of the real property. My father had 0 beneficial interest. But the petition had been granted because no one contested it, because I didn't know it had been filed, because my father had selected a probate attorney I'd never met, in a county where I didn't work, and had the hearing scheduled on a date when I was at a records conference in Helena. Then I found something else. Flat Rock Holdings LLC was registered with the Montana Secretary of State 6 days before the sale. 6 days. The registered agent was Tyler Dunhill. My brother hadn't just received the money from the ranch sale. He had created the entity that purchased it. The ranch wasn't sold to a stranger. It was sold to Tyler at a fraction of its value, using my father's fraudulent authority, so Tyler could immediately leverage the property as collateral for his restaurant loan. And then I found the thing underneath everything. The signature on the personal representative petition, the one where my father swore he was the sole heir, used my grandmother's attorney's name as the preparing attorney. But when I pulled the metadata from the court's electronic filing system, the document had been created on a computer registered to Tyler Dunhill's home address. The author field read, T.D. Unhill. The timestamp showed it was created at 11:14 p.m. on a Saturday, 3 weeks before it was filed. My grandmother's actual attorney, Carl Weston, confirmed when I called him that he had not prepared that petition. He had not been consulted. He had in fact sent a letter to my father 2 months earlier, reminding him that Claire Dunhill was the named beneficiary of all real property, and that any transfer would require my written consent. My father received that letter. I found a copy in the estate file. It was stamped as received. They knew I was the heir. They prepared the fraudulent petition anyway. They timed every step around my schedule. And they sold my grandmother's land, the land she promised me because I was the one who showed up, summer after summer, while Tyler complained about the smell, for less than what it was worth, to a shell company Tyler created in his own living room, 6 days before closing. The key in my hand, the filed-down scrollwork. They had changed the lock on the ranch house after the sale, of course they had, and then altered the old key so I wouldn't notice it no longer fit anything, so I would hold it and think it was still mine. A key to a door I no longer owned, modified just enough to keep me from asking why. My Aunt Patricia, my father's younger sister, had been quiet through all of this. She lived in Billings, 20 minutes from me. She had attended Grandma Elaine's funeral. She had hugged me and said, "Your grandmother would be so proud of you, Claire." She had been present at a family dinner 3 months after the funeral where my father announced that probate was moving slowly, and Patricia had nodded and said nothing. But Patricia had also been present when Tyler formed Flat Rock Holdings. She told me later that Tyler had asked her to be the registered agent, and she'd declined. She said she'd felt uneasy but told herself it was just a business thing. She watched the entity paperwork go through. She watched Tyler take ownership of a ranch she knew belonged to me. And she said nothing to me for 5 months. It was only after I confronted her directly, after I laid a printout of the warranty deed on her kitchen table and watched her face, that she told me what she had seen. She said Tyler and my father had discussed the sale at a family barbecue she'd hosted. She said she'd heard my father say, "Claire won't check, she trusts me." She said she had left the room and told herself it wasn't her business. "I should have called you," she said, sitting across from me with her hands flat on the table. I knew and I told myself it was between you and Richard. I didn't tell her it was fine, because it wasn't. I told her I understood the position she'd been in. I told her understanding it didn't undo what her silence had cost me. She nodded. She didn't argue. And 2 weeks later, she submitted a written statement to my attorney describing what she had witnessed, including the exact date of the barbecue and the exact words my father had used. It was real, and it left everything unresolved between us. The confrontation happened at Hearthstone, Tyler's restaurant, the place my grandmother's land had paid for. He'd been open for 3 months. He'd hosted a soft launch, a grand opening, a feature in a local food magazine. He'd built a custom wood-fired oven imported from Naples. The walls were exposed brick. The tables were reclaimed barnwood, and I thought about the barn at Ridgeline where my grandmother had stored her hay, and I wondered if Tyler had thought about that too, or if the aesthetic was just a coincidence he'd never examined. I walked in at 6:15 on a Thursday. My father was there, Tyler was there, Tyler's wife, Megan, was there. 3 of Tyler's investors were seated at a corner table, and Carl Weston, my grandmother's actual attorney, was already seated at the bar, drinking a glass of water. I'd asked him to come. He'd agreed immediately. He said he had his own file. I didn't make a scene. I sat at the bar next to Carl. I waited until Tyler came over, wearing an apron dusted with flour, looking pleased. "Claire, you finally made it." I did. I reached into my bag. I placed the key on the bar top, brass against wood. Tyler looked at it. "What is that?" "You know what it is." My father appeared behind Tyler. He was already calculating. I saw it in the way his eyes moved to the key and then to my bag. "Claire, if this is about the estate, we can talk about it privately. We can talk about it here." I placed the warranty deed next to the key, then the personal representative petition, then the Secretary of State registration for Flat Rock Holdings LLC, with Tyler's name circled. Then the metadata printout showing the petition was authored on Tyler's computer. My father's first move was denial. That document was prepared by the estate attorney. I don't know what you think you're reading. I placed Carl Weston's letter, the one confirming he had not prepared the petition, next to the stack. Tyler tried reframing. You weren't using the ranch, Claire. It was sitting empty. We made a decision that put the asset to work. You would have gotten your share eventually. I said nothing. My father shifted to family loyalty. After everything I did to hold this family together after your mother left, after everything I sacrificed, you're going to do this in public? In your brother's restaurant? I looked at Tyler's investors in the corner. They were watching. Then my father said, Claire has always had trouble seeing the bigger picture. She fixates on details. It's her job. She can't help it. Carl Weston stood up from the bar. He didn't raise his voice. He placed his own file on the counter, a copy of my grandmother's will, the letter he had sent to my father, and a certified copy of the court order confirming my beneficiary status. I prepared Mrs. Dunhill's will, Carl said. I can confirm, for anyone present who needs to hear it, that Claire Dunhill was the sole named beneficiary of the ranch property. The petition filed by Mr. Dunhill misrepresented his interest in the estate. I was not consulted, retained, or informed. Tyler looked at his investors. Megan had stopped moving. My father's mouth opened, and what came out was a pivot to false generosity. We can fix this. We can restructure. Claire, I'll make sure you get compensated. We were always going to make it right. I picked up the key. I held it in front of him. You filed down the scrollwork so I wouldn't notice this key doesn't fit anything anymore. One sentence, one line, and I set the key back down on the bar and did not speak again. Richard Dunhill did not restructure anything. What happened instead took 18 months and is still unfolding. I filed a complaint with the probate court. An investigation was opened into the fraudulent personal representative petition. My father's appointment was vacated. The court appointed an independent administrator who immediately flagged the below-market sale. The sale of Ridgeline Ranch to Flat Rock Holdings was voided, title reverted to the estate, and from the estate, to me. I received the deed in the mail on a Wednesday afternoon. I opened it at my kitchen table, alone. Tyler's collateral vanished. The loan he'd secured using the ranch as leverage was called. He couldn't cover it. Hearthstone closed 9 weeks later. The imported oven, the reclaimed barnwood tables, the flour-dusted apron, all of it liquidated. The lease was not renewed. My father was referred to the county attorney's office for potential perjury charges related to the false petition. As of 6 months ago, he entered a guilty plea to a misdemeanor charge of fraudulent misrepresentation in a probate proceeding. He was ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $12,400 in legal fees I had incurred. Tyler's wife, Megan, filed for separation 4 months after the restaurant closed. She told a mutual friend that she had not known the full scope of what Tyler and my father had done, that Tyler had told her the ranch sale was Claire's idea. When the documents became part of the court record, she read them. She left. Tyler called me once, 8 months after Hearthstone closed. He didn't apologize. He said, "You could have just talked to me." I said, "You could have just not stolen my inheritance." He hung up. We have not spoken since. My father has not called. Aunt Patricia and I see each other occasionally. She helped me clear out the ranch house when I regained possession. She carried boxes without speaking much. She brought sandwiches. She paused in the doorway of my grandmother's bedroom and said, "I should have been braver." I said, "Yes." And we kept working. I drove out to Ridgeline the first weekend after the title transferred back. I walked the fence line the way my grandmother used to, checking for breaks, testing the wire tension with my gloved hand. 412 acres of grass and silence. The house had been repainted by Flat Rock's contractor, a pale gray that didn't match the original cream, but the bones were the same. The porch, the metal chair, the view of the Bighorn River in the distance, catching light. I brought a locksmith. We replaced the lock on the front door, not because it didn't work, but because I wanted a lock that was mine, a lock no one else had a key to, a lock that matched the door it was meant for. I tried the old key in the new lock, just to see. It didn't turn. Of course it didn't, but I held it there for a moment, the brass warm against the new steel, and I understood what my grandmother meant about people who own dirt versus people who don't. She wasn't talking about land. She was talking about the ground you stand on when someone tries to tell you the story of your own life without your permission. I've thought about silence a great deal since all of this. Not the silence of keeping a secret, that's just hiding. I mean the silence of standing in a room where the truth is available and choosing not to reach for it. Patricia's silence at the barbecue. The probate court's silence when a petition arrived unchallenged. My own silence for 5 months while I grieved and trusted and didn't check. Silence is never empty, it is always doing something for someone. And the question that stays with me, the one I carry the way I carry this key, is whether the silence in your own life is protecting you or protecting the person who needs you not to look too closely. I still have the key. I keep it in the top drawer of my desk at the ranch house, next to a pen and a notepad where I track the grazing lease payments that now come to me. The scroll work is still filed down, the brass is still tarnished green, it doesn't open anything anymore. But I hold it sometimes in the evening, when the light comes through the kitchen window at the angle my grandmother used to sit in, and I feel the flat spot where someone tried to erase what was there. It didn't work. The shape underneath is still visible if you know what you're looking for. Is there something sitting in a drawer somewhere that you've been calling ordinary, because examining it closely would require you to ask questions you're not sure you want answered? This story is a fictional narrative created for entertainment, education, and dramatic reflection. We hope it reminded you that your dignity is not negotiable, and that setting a boundary, even a painful one, can be an act of love for yourself and everyone the pattern would have reached next.